Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of Included, powered by Million Opinions. This podcast is going to bring to you powerful stories, pioneering voices, and impactful ideas which are shaping the landscape of neurodiversity and inclusion in the UAE. From early childcare to classrooms, from boardrooms to government programs, we're really here to amplify the awareness, celebrate differences, and create a space of uniqueness where every mind thrives. This podcast is going to serve as a platform for every voice in the inclusion ecosystem, which means you'll be hearing from educators, corporate leaders, parents, support assistants, doctors, teachers, and hopefully government representatives. The idea is to have meaningful conversations, bring in impactful ideas and insights, and get us one step closer to creating a unique environment where inclusion is celebrated every single day. On that note, the first guest, and it's a privilege to welcome her here today, is Ms.Berna Bower. What better way to start our first episode? We have a passionate advocate for neurodiversity and inclusion. She's an inspiring leader and has played a very key role in implementing neurodiversity and inclusive strategies for one of the largest network of schools across the UAE and globally. She's been serving as the corporate head of inclusion and is none other than Ms.Berna Bower. She's been amazing in most of her work, and truly I cherish speaking to her, engaging in conversations, and it's really an honor to have her as our first guest today to share her insightful stories. Welcome, Ms. Berna. Thank you so much for being our first guest here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I think these conversations are so important, and I feel very honored to be your first guest, but also have the opportunity to speak to people in our field and people who are just interested in inclusion. So thank you for having me.
True. Thank you so much. We really look forward to having this podcast as a platform to enhance every voice who is a part of the inclusion ecosystem. So thank you so much. We'll start off with maybe tell us a little more about yourself and your journey.
Thank you. I am traditionally South African, as you can hear by my accent, and grew up in a time in South Africa where special needs and inclusion wasn't really featured. So I grew up as a child, youngest of 3 children, who was seemingly good at school because I'm very verbal. But the moment I put my hand on paper, the information wasn't quite there. So school was a bit of a struggle for me, and nobody could really understand why. But I was busy and I was always thinking of things and running around. And when I went to university to become a teacher, one of the professors said to me, "I think you have ADHD." Now, it wasn't something that features in South Africa in the 70s at all. And I said, "I can't go home and tell my mum, my professor thinks I've got ADHD, there's something wrong with me," because she'll say that's an excuse. I got tested and then came out very, very high on impulsivity and hyperactive. There we go. Yes. And what happened was I was then put on medication. So I was 22, diagnosed, went on medication and did some therapy to support all of the things that is not quite in place for somebody of my age. And the wonderful thing is it taught me that school doesn't have to be a difficult place. And it became my mission then to actually make school a nice place for children to come to. We spend so much time in school. And I often say to parents, you have this child who comes to school and they're little. And when they are 5, you are the brightest, the fastest, the prettiest, the one with the most beautiful singing voice in your house. And then you go to school and suddenly school tells you, you are not good enough. You are not the fastest. You are not the prettiest. You are not the brightest. And then we expect children to go back to this place where they are struggling every single day for 6 or 8 hours doing things that they struggle with and keep a good attitude. And then we don't understand that they don't want to go to school. And it became my life's mission to change that for children by making teachers and parents aware that when a child struggles, we need to find out why. We need to find out what can we do to fix it. Not fix the child, but fix the environment for the child. Earlier we spoke about how fitting in is the opposite of belonging, because when you try to fit in, you have to change. But when you belong, the environment accepts you or the system accepts you. Fast forward a bit, so that was my early career. I went to start teaching in a rural school in South Africa, very low resources, lots of 45 students in a class, very, very impoverished area. And then started seeing the difference it makes, the relationship, and then leading into the why of why our kids are struggling. Then I had my own beautiful boys, and my youngest was born very prematurely and was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And that then started my journey as a parent. So I knew what it felt like to struggle as a pupil, as a school child. I knew the struggle as a teacher with these children in my class that weren't quite getting it. But then I had the experience as a mum of a child who's struggling. And when Josh was about 3 years old, we came to the UAE and I couldn't find a school place for Josh. I went to the KHDA and Mr. Hassan Abud said to me, "But Berna, you're a teacher, go teach." And I went back into the teaching here in Dubai because at that stage I was in education psychology as well. And the teachers made the most incredible and hugest difference to Joshua's life. So Joshua went through the school system here in Dubai with the right support at the right time in the right measures. And today I'm very happy to say he is studying at the University of Surrey, accounting and finance. He still can't write because of cerebral palsy. We know there's a muscle tone thing. But he studies and he's doing so well because there's access arrangements and there's plans in place. So then my focus changed a little bit as a parent because then the advocacy for the parents' journey started as well. So that's me in a nutshell. I was in Dubai for 7 years working for GEMS Education and then went to the UK for 6 years working for GEMS Education and then had the opportunity to come back to Dubai, which is the town of my heart. So I'm very happy to be back and working in this sphere.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And definitely, like you said, each role must have, shaped your understanding of yourself having the way your brain processes very differently to learning how that can really impact and change things at school for other students and children, which is amazing. What would you say is one such story, experience, or moment you've had as a teacher when you started that really kind of shaped or changed things in the way you see them?
It's actually quite an interesting story. We had a student that came in, and it was also a student with learning difficulties, but complex needs as well. And we had all these wonderful plans. We were going to do this therapy and that center and this intervention and that pull-out support and this teacher. And we had everything planned out for this child. And we started doing these things for the first 6 weeks. And after 6 weeks, things weren't quite working. And I couldn't think why it's not working. So we were sitting in a meeting and we had the young person in the room. They were about 10 at that stage. And I said, we were talking about this child who's in the room. And I said to some of the other multidisciplinary team members, I said, I don't understand why it's not working. And then this young person said, because nobody asked me. And I think that was the moment in my whole 26 years, I'm very old, 26 years of being in education, where I realized that we need to ask our children what works for them. And that also changed the way I see young people. So when I have conversations with young children or young people, I don't ask, what are you struggling with? I don't ask, where do you need help? I ask, what are you good at? How does your brain work? How do you like to learn? Because we all know what's missing, but we don't always know all the gold that they have in them. So that is the one moment that changed it. And after starting to apply that, what I have seen is that the success rate of interventions exponentially grew because the student voice became the leading voice and not all of these things being done to this person, because we are trying to help. Our intention is so pure, but the execution isn't always fair.
True. And I would really connect to that as well. Recently, I had a girl who came into the office, diagnosed with ADHD. And like you said, I think having their perspective sometimes really changes how things are. So she did say that school's doing everything they can. She said, I'm really happy my teacher thinks me sitting in another class, which is quieter, helps me focus better. Distractions are lesser and I perform better. But what she said was, it also makes me very anxious. So she said, more than taking away the distractions, the anxiety doesn't let me do my work. And that's something I'm not able to express. So then we were able to put that back in place and talk to the counselor, tell her that, yes, I know this is helping her from the attention part, but not really from the anxiety, because that's taking over the fear of having to perform. So let's put her back into class, maybe just give her a space which is quieter and see what happens. And that just tremendously changed her scores.
Wow.
So like you said,
Amazing.
the intentions are right, but sometimes to just get their perspectives can help them a lot better, which is wonderful, amazing. For a lot of parents who come in again, one of the questions which I often see them ask, for many of them who don't know what SEND is or SENCO is or NDI, the Neurodiversity and Inclusion is, can you explain that a little for us in simple terminologies?
Absolutely. So I always say to the heads of inclusion that I work with, or the SENCOs that I work with, a SENCO's job is to manage inclusion or support in their school, but they don't own it. The person who owns the inclusion or the SEND piece in a school, or the special needs alternative provision piece, is the teachers. Because when we look at how the structure of inclusion and special needs work, especially here in the UAE, is you have quality first teaching like we do all over the world, UDL principles and those things. But the key lies in somebody overseeing what is happening, the provision, the pieces in place, leading those teams who talk about what best provision is available. And that's the role of the SENCO. The role of the SENCO is not to solve the problem. The role of the SENCO is to direct the way to possible solutions. And parents often don't really understand that their role is so, so huge. Because what we've seen is the school does all this work and the teachers do all the work and the SENCO does all the work because they write the IPs, which they shouldn't. But when the parents co-create with the student, with the teacher, with the SENCO who only manages inclusion, we see the outcomes work. I think one of the big issues we've had in so many years of looking at special needs, we've always viewed it as something to be solved. But the more and more we look at research and international research, what we're actually finding is that every child, every person has some area where they are looking for support, whether that is social emotional, whether it's making friends, whether it's, I'm just lonely, I'm anxious, I'm tired. We all have some area. Now, having said that, we do know that there's certain specific areas of learning, like, dyslexia, dyscalculia, that's diagnosable. And we're moving away from the medical model, but the value of actually knowing what the label says. It doesn't define who I am, but it defines how I can be helped. What is my rights as a young person with these things? And what I absolutely love about what the UAE is doing at the moment, looking at this whole piece of, student of determination, cards and those things, and I know we don't really want to put a label on anybody. But what I have found in my 50 years of being alive is that when I started saying to people, you know what, I am overwhelmed now, this is too much for me, or I'm struggling to understand what you want from me, can you tell me again? It changed how I felt about myself, but it also changed how they saw me. And that is the role of SENCOs. That's the role, is making sure that the child and the parent knows what they can ask for, how we can get there. And if it doesn't work, that's who you go to and say, this is not working. Can we change it? So that is basically the role of the SENCO. They manage, they don't own, but we are always on the side of the child. And I always say being a SENCO is the loneliest job in the world because somebody's always cross with you. If it's not school management, it's the teachers. If it's not the teachers, it's the parents. But when we put the child in the middle and we fight for what's right for the child, you can't go wrong.
True. So beautifully explained. And I've always, I think since medical school, loved the mantra that it's to enable and not label the child. And like you rightly said, it's so important to understand what's going on and now there's a lot going on moving from the medical model to the social model. And I think the blend of both is what really co-creates that space for a child. Amazing. One another question which I often get asked a lot in the clinic is when a child who's neurodivergent and the family wants to start schooling and educational journey that they look into, the difference between the child going into a special school and a regular school with an inclusive framework put in. So parents always have this question, especially when the needs are moderate to higher or level 2, level 3 support, asking, do you think I should put my child into a special school or a regular school with an inclusive framework? How would you maybe advise to them, or what is that you would say in as an advice?
It's an interesting question because, of course, with inclusion, we want to have the least restrictive environment. We want everybody to be with their peers because we know that being with people that are your age, being with people that speak the languages you speak, go to the lessons you have that shared understanding and feeling. In South Africa, we have a saying, Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. It's all community-based. But I think there is a very specific space for clinic intervention, and there is a specific space for specialist units. And I think it depends on child by child. And sometimes what we do, sometimes we say, yes, come into the mainstream. You know, we've got this inclusion framework, but it's not the right fit for the child. And it's not a question that I can answer to say, you know, you always do this or you always do this. I think what we should ask is when a child goes to school, where do they feel safest? Where do they feel they are learning best? Now, David Bartram, brilliant author and brilliant guy in inclusion in the UK, he talks about 1 million minutes. And he says that every child spends 1 million minutes in the school system from the age of 3 to 18. And somewhere in that 1 million minutes, you are going to need support. But what makes inclusion and education so beautiful is there's not one pathway. You can be this and then go to that and then go back to that. And when we take away this frame or this idea that it's a box, school is not a building. Learning is not just one thing. And when we have this blended model where people can move between specialized settings, when appropriate to hybrid settings, when appropriate to mainstream settings, back and forth, we actually see the best of our children. And, you know, parents often think if you speak to parents, there's this brilliant poem called Welcome to Holland. And when you speak to parents, we all have these dreams for our children. But what's most important is that the child or the young person is happy, that they've got community, that they belong, and they have a future. And that is what makes education beautiful, because there's not just one way. So my answer, very long story, but my answer is, what is best for the child in that moment? And that's why I prefer when clinics and specialist settings and schools all work together. So when you have a school that says, when the child is ready, there'll be a place for this child in my school, that's when this works.
Amazing. True. And like you said, it's very unique to each child, and sometimes a blend of both, which really helps the child to thrive in that environment, feel safe, feel happy, which really matters at the end of the day.
All that matters.
Right. Amazing. One other question which most parents often ask when they come into the clinic, when they have their first interviews with school, and during the screening, the team has informed the parents that, okay, maybe the child needs more support than what is required for a regular classroom. And we'd really advise you to go back to a specialist who can help assess developmentally or behaviorally what's happening or their learning needs on what is happening, and come back to us with a report. Most often than otherwise, parents often come to the clinic saying that we are asked to do this, but we're very scared because maybe there is a need that comes up and the school will refuse us from getting admission to the school. And often we try to explain to them that, no, this is purely to get more information on how to support your child, how to create that space, like you said, not just fit in, but create that environment where your child thrives and feels much more empowered in the way that they are learning. And that's something which often parents misunderstand when they've been asked to go get something from going on. So on those lines, what would you say parents should expect when they're going in for a screening for their child or just going in for an admission to a school?
It's a tricky one because in the UAE, unlike many other countries, we have compliance and quality of provision. So in most countries, there's just the quality of provision, which is part of their inspection framework and what are the children getting, or there's a compliance framework that is legislated. And I was at a conference a few years ago at UNESCO, and they were talking about which countries actually legislate inclusion. And yes, I understand that it's not always the right way, but what happens is, unfortunately, parents go from school to school and schools do say no. And it's so unfortunate because that then makes the parents sometimes hide what the child's needs are. And then you have these schools who are, I'm not going to say overloaded because that doesn't sound right, but take in more students of need that they can support. So you have this imbalance at the moment. And I know that especially in the UAE, we are working very hard to stabilize this. But if you look at 2 years ago, the national average in the previous census for special needs or students or people with determination was 7.6%. This July, they published 12.3%. So we can see it's becoming more in line with the rest of the world's statistics. And we know you're looking around about 18%. I think the answer to parents is when there is something and a school picks it up on admissions or pre-admissions, it's better to get it checked out because without getting it checked out, we can't put things in place to support. The other thing is once a child has been identified, schools can't really anymore say no. Okay? And even when schools look at, we can't support this specific need at the moment, schools have a moral obligation to support a parent. Even if that is, go to a clinic for 6 months, do a school readiness program, come back, let's have another look. Because what happens is many of our students go and the parents do the work and they pay, it's very expensive to have a child with specific needs. And they do all this work and then they come back to school and school say, oh, sorry, now we're full. We see this unfortunately. But I think what counts in favor of the parent and the child is the earlier we find out, the better the prognosis, the more we can do. And I literally had this conversation this morning with one of our schools, and we were talking about how you have this loads of children who are little, who have all these communication needs and language needs, and I'm blaming COVID a little bit, but that's another conversation. And then they go through primary, and then they go to secondary, and suddenly in secondary, they find their tribe, they find their place, and we see that the numbers start going off the register. And that's how we know what we're doing is working, because that's exactly what this should look like. Where we have students where they are identified on pre-admissions and parents don't investigate and don't come back to the school, we often then see that need grows and it becomes the gap becomes bigger. And my advice is always use what you can. So if you go to a clinic, you've been to a school, they've identified something, you go to a clinic, you do exactly what the school has said, and there's something that's identified or diagnosed, and you go back to the school, and the school then says, well, actually, we can't support. Ask them, where can you go? Ask them what comes next. Because what we often say is a lot of heads of inclusion and admission teams, they talk to each other. And we have these groups internally with the heads of inclusion that says, I have a child looking for a space in this year. Is there anybody on the group that has a space and stuff? So there's those lines. But also use the regulatory authorities. Go to the KHDA. Ask them, where are schools where I can go to? Go to ADEX, SPIA, RACDOC. Speak to the people that's available to support this piece because it's a growing piece. I can honestly, hand on heart, say that a lot of times parents come to us and say, I've been to 13 schools, and 13 schools have said no. And when they do come to us, we always try to pick up, find a spot or place a child. even if it's on part-time basis, because we can do that as well. And that's the other thing is when a child's not quite ready for that full integration, there's always a plan to be made, especially at that younger ages.
True. Which is so well explained in terms of it's not just about, fitting in or just going in, but also making sure the support is established before they're able to do it, which is amazing. One another thing which often parents debate is the curriculum.
Yeah.
In your opinion, would you say that makes a big difference? Like, especially if a child is neurodivergent, they say, should we go British? Should we go American? Should we go, a national curriculum like an ICSE or a CBSE? What, in your opinion, would you say?
I have 48 incredible heads of inclusion that works in GEMS, and all different curriculums. Some of them have combination curriculums where you have maybe CBSE and IB, or you might have GCSEs with the CBSE, or these different. We even have national curriculum with IB and these combinations. The answer is good inclusion is good inclusion. Good teaching and learning is good teaching and learning. And if the school, regardless of the curriculum, has good teaching, good quality first teaching and good inclusion, any curriculum works, because that's how learning works. As on a personal note, I know that the expectation of the curriculum needs to match the expectation of the parent. Okay? And some parents will say, I want my child to eventually become a doctor. And then we will pick the curriculum that fits that. In my experience, the CBSE curriculum, the ICSE curriculum is more structured at a younger age, where the national curriculum as well as the American curriculum is much more play-based, inquiry-based, like the IB. So if you have a child that has a specific neurodiversity like ASD or ADHD, where you need a lot of structure, we don't like structure, but we need it, then maybe looking at those more structured curriculums from a younger age, where the expectation is so explicit. What the British curriculum does incredibly well is because it's a spiral curriculum, there's nothing you basically learn in year 2 that you can't learn in year 3, because it comes back around and around and around. The American curriculum is brilliant for inclusion as well, because it lends itself quite beautifully to the hours model. So we can adapt the curriculum as long as you spend the time on the work. And where the IB curriculum is brilliant for inclusion is you can show your learning in different ways. What works for you? Writing is not the only way to show what you know. You can do a presentation, you can, do a voice note, you can make a video, you can create a model. So each of the curriculums actually have the capacity for inclusion. But I think it's more in line with what is the parent's expectation with the end goal in mind.
Amazing. That's really nice to know, and very positive for most parents who always want to maybe switch because they try one and then say, okay, maybe this is not suiting, and that's why, and then move to another. And there's a lot of change because the child is settling in, making friends and hopping to another place. So that's a lot of change that they go through. Amazing. One another thing which has taken up a lot of interest and a move or shift towards education is homeschooling.
Yes.
Right? And what is your suggestion or recommendation for those parents who would want to look into homeschooling as an option? So if you can just elaborate for us, what exactly is homeschooling? Is it something that's recognized? What curriculums do they follow? And who would that be a better suit in the neurodivergent world?
I'm going to start at the end and then work my way back to the beginning. I'm just going to say homeschooling is where you choose alternative curriculum that you either build yourself as a parent or through an organization. Now in the UAE, it has to be through a recognized organization like Sophia School or onlinelearning.com or those kinds of spaces where you have this curriculum that is delivered in the child's space. And the wonderful thing is, during COVID, when we went online, and everybody suddenly had to know how to teach on YouTube and Zoom and all these different channels, who were the children who actually flourished? It was the children who were learning in their own environments, but were still part of a learning community. And where homeschooling actually works incredibly well is where a parent has the resources and the people involved that can actually structure the curriculum to suit the child's specific needs. Because you can do your values, you can do your specific outcomes, and the child gets the best of both worlds. Where homeschooling doesn't work well is where it's in isolation, because we were not created to be all on our own the whole day. So if you do think about homeschooling and it's something that you're thinking of as a parent to do, make sure that you're part of a community of other homeschoolers. There are huge communities of this where you can do reach out days together. You can go to the different clinic settings where they do special days for robots and special days for space travel. And as long as the curriculum that you are offering your child is rich and filled, but then also meets the criteria of the regulatory bodies, I think homeschooling is a beautiful thing for a specific child. It's not for everyone. Lots of children do like the 8,000 students that surrounds them in school, but for some children it doesn't work. But please do make sure that when you look at homeschooling is you've got a service provider that is accredited, you are part of a community, and that the curriculum that you are building for your child is full of amazing opportunities and exposures.
Amazing. Thank you for that. One another thing which parents most often hear, especially when they have the first time diagnosis, first time schooling experience for their child, is LSA.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, a lot of questions arise in terms of who is this person? What do they do? Would that make my child dependent on this person? Is it necessary? So a lot of these questions come up during meetings or school discussions, I'm sure, in the clinic to the therapists. How would you be able to explain this to a parent in terms of the support that they bring in, which can incredibly change the way they're thriving in the classroom?
It's one of those wonderful resources that we have. When we look at research and we look at belonging, just the belonging piece, everybody just needs one person on their side. You can do amazing things. If you think the brain is amazing like this, somebody else thinks you can. So for me, the question about an LSA is not what is the work that they're going to do with the child. It's not, what is the specific area of need that the child has. It's what is the relationship going to be like. Because the job of the LSA is not to be velcroed to the child. The best LSA is the one that stands at the back of the class, watches what's going on, and then supports the child. We also know that helplessness piece absolutely is part of the picture. Because the message we give children when we cut for them, when we draw for them, when we write for them is that I can do it better than you. That's not what school is about. So when we talk about LSAs, my question is always when a parent says, I've been advised to get an LSA, my question is always firstly, what is the relationship going to be like? Secondly, how would your child respond to somebody supporting them? And thirdly, if we don't see results within a certain amount of time, like a half term or a term, then we need to have this conversation again. The job of the LSA is to support the student to access, not to learn, not to teach this child, not to tie their laces, but to actually support them in accessing. So the job of the LSA is to be the link between the teacher and the child and look at the planning of the teacher and say, actually, my child will be able to do this and this and this. Could we change this a little bit? Do we really have to write this much? So they mediate the curriculum. And then on the child side is, I think you can do it. Give it a go. What's the worst that can happen? You should not have an LSA for a very, very long time. No child should leave school with an LSA. The same as we do with diapers. Most children potty train and, become independent. And the job of the LSA and of the inclusion team is to work themselves out of a job. So those would be my things. The other bit is also what is the training like for the LSA in the setting? So I don't expect every LSA who joins the company or walks through my school's doors to know exactly everything about that child or about dyslexia or about support. But the question that parents should ask schools is, how are you going to train this person to support my child in a way that my child in a year's time won't need them? That's the question. And if there's good training, there's good relationship, there's good mediation, and there's advocacy, then absolutely get an LSA.
Amazing. Yeah. Most often, like you said, they're more like that bridge, right? So I'm going to help you support, but in the process, I'm going to teach you how to do it on your own.
Absolutely.
Be independent and function without me, hopefully as soon as they can. Wonderful. What, in your opinion, would you say are some of the signs parents can look for to say their child is truly thriving in an environment, especially when they have a lot of needs, a lot of supports, a lot of IEPs, ITPs going on, and they do see progress, which they acknowledge that there is support going on, the child is learning, but sometimes they don't understand if that's optimal. Like, is that the best my child could do? So can you maybe simplify it for us and say, what are some of the green flags or red flags as parents we should be aware of to know if our child is truly thriving?
I think the quick answer is your child happy? And that progress. So when we look at our own children, in South Africa we have a saying, every mommy thinks her donkey is a racehorse. So it's your job as a parent to believe the best of your child. It's absolutely your job. It's also your job to have those high expectations. But you should expect the school to also have that high expectations. Sylvia Plath, that lovely author, says, if we don't expect anything, you'll never be disappointed. Now, in life, that's a good rule, so it keeps you grounded. But in schools, and when it comes to children, we don't know how much potential they have. We can never say, and we must never make the mistake of saying, this is the cap. So as a parent, you have intuition. You know your child. If your child is happy, your child is making at least the expected or predicted progress, and your child is moving towards that independence, then that's a success story. But we must be better. We must ask for more. So the question then is, what comes next? What is the next goal? And where we have IEP targets or clinic targets or therapy targets or behavior targets, if that target is a good target, then your child should be reaching that target within the set time. If the child reaches that target in a shorter time, that target was too easy. We were not expecting enough. When that child does not reach the target, we know that that target was too hard. We need to break that down a bit. But the answer is always, do I see my child and do they see themselves as the best version of them that they can be? And that's the answer.
Amazing. A happy brain learns, right?
Always. So happy children learn. That is true.
Yes, that's how usually, even in schools, like you said, if they are happy, the parents happy, everything's going well, learning has been fantastic, and it's a good...
And we know that when we expect less of our children, they're not happy. Yes. Because they also know they can do better and they can do more. So absolutely, a happy child is what we're going for, firstly.
Yes. Amazing, amazing. Now that we have increasing awareness about neurodivergent conditions, neurodiversity, and how the processing and learning is so different, we do see that, like you said, maybe the load is not an appropriate word, but we are seeing increasing support staffs that you might need who can also cater to these children, right? Would you say that's something we are able to proportionately increase? Like how you said, the numbers have gone up from 7 to 12%, but is that also kind of a barrier in terms of how we are able to cater to the larger population?
You know, it's a funny story. Somebody said the other day, there's more and more of these children that has these needs. And I said, no, they've always been there. We were just terrible at spotting them. And we don't actually have to take any more students of need into our schools because they're already there, but we haven't been good at spotting them. So once we know that there are children there, that we need to have a better look at that first identification, we do need to increase the staff. And I know there's a huge piece of work going on, especially in ADEC and KHDA, about how do we make sure that the loading is correct? Because when you have more adults than students in a class, that's also not good for learning. So how do we actually work smarter, use technology, and use the other children in the classroom to support our students? That's where the gold dust lie. I've went to visit a school in Thailand. It was absolutely brilliant in Thammasat and in Bangkok. And what they do is they have 2 qualified teachers in every lesson. And then they have what they call roamers, who's not TAs. They're other teachers who are specializing in specific things, and they move around in the class. Then they also have TAs and they have LSAs where needed. But the beauty of this is there's so many minutes that teachers actually miss when we're teaching. We are busy. You know, you're busy and you're performing because every lesson is a performance, a drama performance. But the people who's roaming, their only job is to see who's not engaging, who's struggling, where is that loading wrong, where is the cognitive overload. And that model to me was beautiful, because actually when it's good for everybody, when learning is good for everybody, it's good for nobody. But when learning is specialized to a specific area of learning, and we look at the cognitive load, we look at that repetition, we look at that practice, I do, we do, you do, all of those UDL principles, that model works better. Because even the child who we missed can then catch up. The other bit is we need to be better at teaching our children to say, Miss, I don't understand, or I'm not quite sure where we are, or can you explain that again? And I know in some cultures and curriculums it's easier because they do, and in some they don't. But when you are 7, you sing because you think you can. And you don't care who's listening, or you dance or you run because you think you can. And we need to go back to that. We need to show children and young people that it's okay to say what you need. Because when they self-advocate, you won't need more staff. Because they will say, I'm not quite sure where we're at.
That's so beautifully said. Yeah. That leads to my next question. In terms of the peers you were talking about, right? So there's a larger proportion of the classroom who fulfill the societal standards of normal, the neurotypical population. What are some of the frameworks that go into school policies when we're trying to educate neurotypical peers and their families about neurodiversity and inclusion? Because like you said, that's a huge support system that can be made use of in the classroom, like the peer system, the study buddy, or a bus person who's just there to comfort and reduce their anxiety. So do we have anything in place for different schools, or likely under the KHD again, to enhance this understanding for them?
Unfortunately, not yet. But there's a huge piece of work that's happening in schools individually about how do we not desensitize, because that's also not quite the way we're going, but how do we educate and make aware? And that's why you'll see loads of schools have awareness days where they would have inclusion awareness, or they'll have ASD awareness, or they'll have ADHD. I mean, this is ADHD month. You have these just like we do with breast cancer and we do with other areas of needs. And the big thing is the more we talk about it, the better we get at it. So what I always like to do, and when these schools have these days, is have these young people who are having these barriers to learning. And I call them barriers because that's something we can move. Have them tell their story. Have them stand up and say, actually, this is what I'm going through, this is what I need. Because what we see is empathy is much higher in our children than it is in the adults. So that's the one piece. The second thing is when we start educating our parents, because what happens is Johnny goes home and he's got Joshua in his class, and Joshua is really disruptive because his needs aren't being met. So what happens is Johnny goes home and he says, Joshua again today he threw his water bottle and it hit that girl, and this parent gets upset, rightly so, because you pay for education, your child's education is interrupted, and. But the piece that's missing is the parents around the child who is struggling, not the child's parents, but the parents around the child who is struggling. They don't always understand what's really happening there. Mm. And I always say we sneak in understanding. So, because when we have coffee morning and we invite all our students of determinations parents, they know everything we're going to tell them, They come there for community and because they feel sorry for us if nobody comes. But where we need to actually educate is the rest of the parent body. You don't understand autism until you've met somebody and worked with somebody and lived through it. The same with ADHD, dyslexia. It's a big piece. So what I always say is every single parent training or every single parent meeting that you have all your parents in, always sneak in a bit of inclusion. Sprinkle it around and set up working parties of parents of able-bodied children or children who don't have any specific needs or out there needs to actually support and come up with ideas of how to support. In Dubai, we are very good at that. We've got a lot of parents who are very supportive. And what you'll see is in Sharjah the same and in Abu Dhabi as well, but what you'll see is the children start to defend the child because they start to understand. They grow up with it. It's the parent piece that needs a bit more work.
That's true. And a lot of times we do hear where parents get educated through the child.
Absolutely.
Right? So the child's learned something about a special need that the peer has had in the classroom, goes back, says, this is what I did, this is how we have learned. And I think that's how we're moving and building in as much as we can in terms of getting the entire population understand about how neurodiversity is.
The worst question we can ask our children is, who did you play with today? Who's your friends? Who are your friends? The question is, were you a good friend today? And who were you a good friend to? Because that changes the conversation from my needs to the needs of the ones around me.
That's true. Recently, one of the parents actually walked up to me and she said, I'm so proud of my child today. And I said, oh, that's amazing. Like, what happened? She said, there was another kid who possibly was on the autism spectrum, had a tantrum in the supermarket. The mother was trying to really help. She's like, I was so helpless. Like, I didn't know what I could do for her. But this kid was about 5.5, just walked up to that kid, sat down next to him and consoled him. And he just tried to give him a hug, and it was just so beautiful. And the meltdown gotten better and everything. And the mom later asked him that, how did you know what to do? And he said, no, I have a friend in the class and we all do the same thing to him. So I think that's where the learning starts, in the classroom and goes into the society. So I think it's beautiful how we're creating more and more ways to get that information going and learning happening, which is a truly
It makes me think, when you're on a flight and you have this new mum with this baby and the baby screaming, and it irritates everybody else because we all paid for a ticket on the flight. All that mum needs is somebody to go up and say, is there anything I can do? Or actually, it's okay, we've all been there. And that changes it. So it's exactly what that young person is showing us is, I'm in the mud with you. I'll sit with you as long as it takes. It's actually beautiful.
Yeah. Which is truly nice. And especially parents who also have a child who's neurotypical and neurodivergent, I think they kind of know the experience of both the sides, like how they can do and what can be done in terms of helping them forward as well, which is amazing. One other thing which we often see when we're trying to understand the circle of care is the connectors, right? So there's teachers, the educators, the SEN team, the LSA, the therapists, the doctors, the parents. And we try to establish that collaboration as much as possible because the child is the center, the family is the center in which we're working, and as holistically as we can do. But sometimes we do find the connectors go missing. Everybody has the right intention to help, but either because of busy clinic days or busy IPs and ITPs and schoolwork going on and everything, we often ask parents to be those connectors because they are the rock solid foundation, irrespective of
they're there all the time,
how things are moving in. So what would be your advice to parents on how they can play that role better in bringing in the school, the clinic and the medical team and the rest of the support team together?
When you're a parent of a child with need, you have to be a bit more pushy. You have to ask for stuff. You have to stand on your child's rights. You have to fight for stuff that other people don't even think about. I always say when you have a child with need, the need doesn't stop at the door. The need goes in wherever the child is, whether that's at the park, whether that's at school, in the shopping mall. So what we need to do as parents, and as a parent myself of a child with needs, I had to be that person. But what I did was I would always link everybody every time. And when we had an IEP meeting, my first question when the IEP meeting was set up for my son Josh, I would always ask the teacher, who else did you invite? Who else did you speak to? When I was at the clinic for speech therapy and for OT, I would say, have you let the school know? And you're absolutely right. It's a bit unfair that that's the parent's job, but the responsibility of care stays with the parent. We're all in this together, but the responsibility of care stays with the parent. And then what I would also do as a parent is I will create as many opportunities to have the child as the centerpiece. So when we talk about the IEPs, have the child there or the young person if it's appropriate. When we talk about the clinic piece, now you actually only need 2, maybe 3 multidisciplinary team meetings, everybody together. And if you do one in October and you do one in June, you set up for the year and you set up for the year. That's what you do. And everything in between, the parent can be the go-between. But be selfish as a parent for your child. Stand on your right as a parent for your child. And yes, be a pushy parent. Of course you have to be a pushy parent, because if you don't push the door, your child won't be able to do it on their own. And it's your right to ask for certain things. But be kind with boundaries. My dad always used to say, you attract more with honey than you do with vinegar. So also keep in mind as a parent that the teacher might have stuff going on, the clinician might have stuff going on, and also my child is not the only child that these people are dealing with. So be kind, be firm, and do what's right for your child.
So beautifully said, yes. It's also important for them to put themselves into other shoes, just like most of the time everybody is doing for the others.
And the big thing for parents is self-care. Yes. Okay? Because you are so busy looking after the needs of your child or your children or your family that sometimes a mum and a dad forgets that you're a person too. And what happens then is sometimes we get lucky and you get into a situation where somebody else stops you and say, how are you? But those are not usually the conversations we have. People often ask, how's Johnny doing? How's Joshua doing? Tell me about that. But people don't always go to a special needs mum or dad and say, how are you? When was the last time that you had 20 minutes to read a book? Or when was the last time you did something for yourself? And that's why a group of community around you is so important. Because we all need that moment where we just have time for ourselves. When you have a child with needs, and many parents don't understand this, but when you have a child with need, you're always on call. You're never off duty. And when the phone rings and you see the school's name, the first thought is, oh, please let him not have done anything wrong or not have gotten hurt, or, our anxiety is so much higher. So look after yourself, because you can't really do everything that your child needs if you are not well.
True. It's important for them to fill their cup before they try to help. And that also reminds me of recently one of the parents who brought in their child, hopped in clinic after clinic trying to get a diagnosis. And then we sat down and we said, okay, let the child stay home. We just want to speak to you for a couple of sessions. Mm-hmm. And the mom actually thought we were crazy. So way after she came and she said, I thought you were crazy the first time I met you. But like you rightly said, it translates so much. So long story short, the mom was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, which is one of the hyperthyroid conditions, making her anxiety even worse, which was translated to the child. And when she got treated, over the next 3 months, school actually rang up and said, what therapy did you all give him? We said, no. He didn't step into any therapy, maybe did a bit of groups and play, but he didn't need anything. It was the environment which was making it so difficult. And in the whole process of being worried about the child, the mom never got herself medically checked. And it was, she was actually happy and sad at the same time. Happy because things were settling, but sad because it was her health which was actually translating and affecting. So I think that's a very, very important message, that every parent must make self-care a mandatory and a responsibility rather, so that they're there for their children subsequently. Great. For a neurodivergent child who is into higher school and moving on to universities and pre-universities, what is something as schools you would say changes the way they offer to neurotypical peers versus neurodivergent children, just in terms of preparing them to a world which may not be the same as it was in school?
It's incredibly important that we remember that when these children move on, when all our children move on, there's a huge piece of anxiety connected to this. Because for the last 13 years or 12 years, depending on your curriculum, you've known what to expect on a day-to-day basis. So the transition piece becomes so much more important. Whether the child's going to a college like Dubai College of Tourism, or they're going straight into a workplace, or they are going to university, it's always important to round about the middle of the year before the last year, so the penultimate year, to start having those conversations not only with the child, but also with the parent about how are we transitioning this child? What are the future visions? So if a child is going to university, what are the conversations that we are having from the school side with the prospective universities? What are the conversations we're having with the clinics? What are the conversations that we are having with these workplaces that our children might be going to? But then also giving the child or the young person enough visit time. Because we know that the familiar becomes safe. So if a child is looking at Birmingham University of Dubai, for instance, for a course that they are going to do there, then I would suggest the schools reach out to those places and say, can we come for a visit? And you take the child's preferred adult with them or the parent with them, and you arrange these contact meetings or these touch days. Some schools are incredible with this, and most schools, in actual fact, all schools in the UAE do need to have a careers counsellor or a counsellor for futures. And these people are not only there for universities, because not everybody goes to university. So as a parent, I would make a connection with those people and say, what's on offer for my child that's neurodiverse or that has different needs, and how can we set that piece of work in motion?
Right. That's a wonderful way to go around. Like you said, if it's not just the parent's responsibility that, okay, I have to find something for my child, but it's also the circle around who is trying to help the child in transitioning, which is wonderful. And often we do see this period also becomes very challenging, because that's also the time period the medical professionals transit from a pediatrician to an adult psychologist, psychiatrist, and physician who's seeing them. Having worked in many parts of the world, how would you say inclusion in this part of the world, UAE, especially Dubai, UAE, is different from the rest of the world?
I think I love the UAE, and when I had the opportunity to come back to Dubai, I grabbed it, because inclusion, there's no place like the UAE, and inclusion here is not just special needs. Inclusion actually has so much more to do with cultural inclusion, language inclusion. You are okay who you are, and that's beautiful, because if you think about it, we are 90% expats. And the wonderful thing about that is we all need each other. We all need each other. We can't do this without each other. And the bigger inclusion piece is that when we just look at special needs and SEND, the big difference for me is that in many countries, a lot of the support is funded, by outside agencies or by the government and stuff like that. And inclusion is incredibly expensive. When you have a child with special needs, if you think you pay school fees, you pay LSAs fees, you pay therapy fees, holiday clubs, everything becomes more expensive. But not just with money, with time as well. So as a mum, you can only work half day because the afternoon's for therapy. So you are driving to and fro, or you have to create a system where you've got something that drives your child. So that whole piece changes for you. And that is something that I've seen in the UAE, where we are trying to find the middle way where therapist comes into the school building. That makes that a bit easier. So although a lot of it's funded outside in many other countries, and we know there's a huge reform on that as well, and parents in the UAE have to pay for all of the services, I think that we are getting better at including the community and bringing the support inside the school to make it a one-stop shop, if we can call it that, for those inclusive services. I can say this, that I think if my Josh was in any other country in the world, including South Africa, including the UK, including the US, I don't think he would have been where he is today if he didn't have the inclusion and the absolute belonging that he had in the UAE. From the teachers to the security guards to, when we have these runners, the security guards know where to be and where to stop. Everybody's involved in inclusion in the UAE, and that is what makes it incredibly special.
True. And I think Dubai possibly is also the perfect example for diversity, like you said, in every form that you can think of, which is also very, very incredible. One another thing which is an extremely important link in the whole circle of care we were talking about is siblings. For most children on the neurodivergent spectrum who have a sibling, mostly neurotypical, who understand what's going on, either older or younger, how would you say a parent would balance this out in terms of, trying to explain, because you don't want to take them off their childhood and become the responsible bigger brother, but at the same time, you'd want them to understand because you'd be growing up to be their best advocate years from now. So what is that advice you would give them?
As a parent, it's so tricky because we know that the child who screams the loudest usually gets the most attention. We know this because we like peace. We like peaceful environments for all our children. But there's two things. The first thing is, if you want to know how to treat a child with needs, look at what their siblings are doing, because they know what to do. But the more important piece is, when you have a neurotypical and a neurodiverse child in your home, like I did, for instance, my eldest is incredibly bright. Everything was easy for him. That's what his brother will tell you. Neil will sit for 20 minutes on a homework that will take Joshua an hour and a half because it's just easier for him. Is the important piece is that parents remember that other child that's neurotypical needs exactly the same amount of time spent as your child with needs. And it's very easy to focus on the child with needs because we're working against the clock, we're racing. But whether the child has needs or no needs, you only have 18 summers. And you never want, as a parent, intentionally want your neurotypical child to look back at their childhood and say, we were always only catering to my brother's needs or my sister's needs. So I would do two things. I would do special time with just that sibling and the parent. Do something special like a coffee date or a milkshake date or whatever you want to call it. Maybe just a walk around the park. And then at least twice a week when things are at a high escalation level. And we know often with neurodiverse children that's twice a day, not twice a week, but at least twice a week. Have your neurotypical child be removed from the situation so it doesn't become their responsibility. We often see that they take it on themselves. But it's important to remind the child that they are not the responsible adult in the room. So go for a bike ride, go meet up with your friends. You're allowed to do that. The other bit is from the neurodiverse child's point of view. That is their hero. Whether they're younger or older, that is their hero. And for them, it's also so important to be included with that neurotypical child and their friendship group. Because it might be that neurodiverse child never gets invited to birthday parties, never gets to be part of things with their own peers. And that's where the peer group of the sibling becomes so important.
True. And that reminds me of a little boy who came into the clinic. Mum said the teachers suspect he has selective mutism. And this is the younger sibling of an older child who has been diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum and has been coming to the clinic for therapies. And this came as a surprise because this was the chatterbox. Every parent meeting, he would just go on and you'd be like, okay, maybe we find the play area, let's finish, let elders talk, and then you can come back. So it was very surprising to see how he got diagnosed as a possibly selective mutism. And then we said, okay, there must be something that's going on, and let's look deeper into it. So we had a couple of play therapy sessions with this kid. And then in one of the sessions, he just quietly comes up and he says, he asks, will I also become autistic? And then everybody just paused and we were like, okay, let's talk more about this. And then that's when he said, all my friends stopped playing with me, inviting me to their houses because they all think I would become autistic like my older brother. And they would become autistic through me. So they all thought this was a communicable disease or a condition which would just pass on. And they said, let's just stay away from you. And it was just heartbreaking. I don't think anybody in the room that day had, not been in tears. And then we spoke to the mom and the family, and they were quite shocked to understand this was what was going on. And the little one just wanted to stay quiet because he didn't know what to do, how to solve this. And he was scared because he thought he was going to become autistic as well. So then started his journey. So helping him understand that this is not it is. Then we invited a couple of his friends and said, okay, let's all do understanding about the situation. And then again, he went back to becoming the chatterbox he was. But again, a lot of the peers' parents understood what was going on. Yeah. And they said, okay, why don't we pull him into the birthday parties? It's okay. Maybe we're just going to keep the music lower because we know, this older sibling can get overwhelmed. And the whole community came together to really support. And I think siblings play such a crucial role. And a lot of times, like how we said, parents don't really understand where do I draw that line? How do I differentiate? They're trying to do their best, but sometimes these kind of just slip off and really, really impact them in a very significant way. And one another thing we often discuss is also finding the right time and right way to educate these siblings on what's happening with their brother or sister in terms of diagnosis. Why are they different? How can you advocate for them amongst your peer circle as well? So that's something which is that is very, very important, like you said, in bridging that gap. My last question to you is, and all of us love to have something ideal, right? So if we were to describe an ideal inclusive education and what the journey would look like, and what are some of the challenges or learning experiences that you've gained through these years?
The ideal situation would be where inclusion should not even be mentioned because it's part of who we are and what we do. And if I had all the money in the world, I would have a school or schools or all schools have specialists in the building. So that where we now have these different settings and the child has to transition from setting to setting. And when you transition, and a lot of people don't really realize this, but when you transition, you change a little bit of who you are. You're different at home than you are at school. You're different at school than you are in the clinic. Because each of these situations ask for something different. So where this could work beautifully is where we bring all of those specialists into the same building all of the time. So every child has access to speech therapy. Every child has access to a behavior specialist. Every child has access to play therapy. It's the most amazing thing in the world. But it becomes part of who we are. It's a system that is very much based on something like the Finnish system or the Swedish system, where every child, and Norway does this brilliantly as well, where you look at the child as a whole being and not part of a puzzle. And we're very good at, boxing our kids in different areas. That's the first thing. The second thing is where we introduce a curriculum or education where it's values-based but with expected outcomes. So I am kind because I have to be kind. Why? Because that changes the world. So when we are values-based and we teach children about how to interact with people around us, how to interact with the earth, how to interact with our resources, our money, our human capital, with the outcome that we are making the world a better place. And I know the world is not built like that, so that would be the ideal for me. Challenges it always goes back to the money because it's expensive to run a country, it's expensive to run a school. And when you have for-profit education, you have the best teachers in the world because you can afford that. But the cost always goes back to the parents. So that's definitely a challenge. The other thing is And I hate these words. So whenever somebody says that, is when people say, but this is how we've always done it. So the next best thing for me is be teachable. Everybody in the system can learn something. Every single conversation I have, whether it's with the guy who fills my tank at the garage or the guy in the shop or the guy who replaced my tire when I had a flat tire, thank you again for helping me. Every time you leave a conversation, you leave a little bit richer because everybody can teach you something. So in a system where everybody's teachable and we are learning, we get the best outcomes. The last thing is, and that's a big barrier for me in terms of what we see, is these egos that's in education and in settings where I'm the specialist, I'm the expert, I know, therefore you must. And actually, no. The only expert on any child is that child. So we need to get better at that. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, definitely. And if, let's say, a vision of 5 years from now or 10 years from now, because we've been seeing a lot of change, especially over the past decade or two, what is the potential you would see for more inclusiveness in the UAE in terms of what role do parents, or medical professionals, educators, or anybody for that matter in the community, what role would they play in bringing up this a lot better?
It's very interesting you ask that question, because if you look at the pattern over the last 16 years, and I can only talk about the last 16 years because that's the period of time I've been involved in inclusion in the UAE, how much acceptance, how much awareness, how much more there's been being done for our students of determination, and not just our students of determination, but also our EAL children, our students who are new to the country, our families. It's huge what's been happening over the last 16 years. And if we can just carry on with this momentum, I think we'll get to a society where everybody's accepted and involved, where inclusion becomes who we are and not something we do. So I can definitely see that happening. I think what we need to keep on doing is keep on talking about this, making people aware, because most people, very, very, very few people in life goes out with bad intentions and do not want to include, explicitly wants to exclude. Most people, when they understand, they will be kinder and they will include. So we need to keep on talking about this, keep on making people aware, and keep on telling our stories. You know, our stories of struggle, but also resilience and resolve, because the big difference for me is with resilience, you bounce back. But resolve, you keep going forward. So I think we just need to be better at and keep on being better at fighting for our children, but talking about this piece.
True. So well said. I think how they say one step at a time, it's going to be one mind at a time. And
Absolutely.
The difference we can make in, just giving that little part to everybody we meet. Like you said, it need not be a coffee morning with parents of children who are neurodivergent, but shift towards everybody, even children who are neurotypical otherwise. This is the most hardest question, and I promise it's the last one. What is the one word you would say if I ask you what inclusion is? Just one word. Or maybe a short phrase. What would that mean, inclusion mean to you?
I would usually say belonging, because that is my catchphrase. I always talk about belonging. But I think it is safety.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was our pleasure. And I think there's been a lot of insight and impactful ideas that have come our way. And I hope really a lot of parents get questions and, ask these a lot of times. And I hope I've been able to ask some of them to you, and they have the right answers to be able to provide the right support for their children.
Thanks again for having me.